Hello.
Hi, Laura.
Hi. So today is the 18th of June, 2020. We are here in Germany. On my side, it's almost noon. And with us today, we have Spoorthy. And she is going to be telling us about her story in Bangalore, India. Please start off and just tell me your name complete and just tell me about yourself.
Okay, hi, Laura. Thanks for having me on this and giving me an opportunity to share what we are undergoing in India. So I hope everybody who is listening to us is doing well, and I wish them well too. So I'm Spoorthy Raman. I am a science writer and reporter from Bangalore, India, as you mentioned. I spend most of parts of my life in Bangalore, so this is a city I've been in for almost about 25-30 years now. So yeah, um, so that's my Bangalore connection. And I work as a managing editor for a science news portal called Research Matters, which we started about 3.5 years ago. And prior to that, I was one of those techies in Bangalore, being a software engineer,
Which
and
is
switched
so
gears
needed.
just yeah, of course. So I thought science was more more attractive in that sense, so I just switched gears and started writing.
And it's a perfect place to be at this moment. So you had a premonition, let's say, right?
Well, I didn't really wish the world so bad, but yeah, I mean, of course, everything has been so interesting with what we are seeing around us. Well, some things unfortunate, some things very hopeful. A lot of layers have really, revealed themselves in the times that we are in. So it's definitely interesting, I would say that.
That for sure. Even if heartbreaking at times, interesting this pandemic is, and science in general. And so you already told me a little bit about your switch from IT to science writing, but just out of curiosity, literally before the pandemic began, so before pre-COVID-19, were you doing something different and now it has changed? Did you have to reinvent yourself, or you just continued writing about science and focused more on COVID, or what is it?
Okay. I got into science writing about 4.5 years ago. Um, uh, and when I started off with this, I wasn't in India. So I was doing this remotely. So for me, when things got locked down, I always worked from home for the past 4.5 years. So
Anyway.
that really didn't change. So yeah, what in fact actually changed, and because of my current profession, is the workload. Obviously, I would write, and I still write about anything in science for Research Matters and other publications. Uh, right now, I'm also involved in a voluntary group of, I wouldn't say activists as such, but then science communicators and scientists who have come together in India, and we've all formed some kind of a forum called the Indian Scientists Response to COVID-19,
Oh, wow.
where I am coordinating the science communication efforts from this forum to just generally make the public aware of what this pandemic is about, the misinformation and the disinformation that we see all around us, and how, with the knowledge of science, can we beat it so that we not only help people prepare and raise their scientific tempers, but eventually save lives. That is the most important thing. So with the work on that side, of course, there is a lot of work on my plate. That's how pandemic has changed me in terms of work. And I'm meeting really interesting people and doing like interesting stuffs, because the other good thing that's happened is the communities have come together, like me, and like how I and you met, right? With so many things that weren't there as opportunities before the pandemic. Like people wouldn't give freebie online courses and things like that. This has given us some opportunity to kind of get together with the larger world. And same thing that has happened in the ISRC work that I just described, right? It's gotten about 700 people together. That's a big number of scientists and science
Wow.
communicators for a country like India, where you don't really, expect to find so many people doing this field of study, or pursuing this field as a career and coming in voluntarily without any institution kind of backing this up. So that has also kind of given opportunities to interact with people who I had never spoken
Couldn't-
before to. Yeah, and wouldn't have come across if not for the pandemic. That's there. And at local levels, there are interesting stories to actually observe as well. So even if I'm kind of bored doing my work, there is so many things happening that there is always something to kind of
Always
put
something
your
to do.
ears into. Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, thank you for telling us about this initiative. I I think it's the perfect thing to do right now. It's really thinking about not ourselves, but about everybody else, which in turn means thinking about ourselves, right? And like you said, there's way too much disinformation, misinformation, and technology. Yes, it has its pluses, but as we have unfortunately seen with this pandemic, it can have a very negative effect because it's the ease of sharing, right? So you can share and call it a fact very
Yeah,
easily. And in
absolutely.
in general, it's a bad thing always, but in a pandemic that it, like you said, literally kills people, aside from the 100 other problems, it no, it just, we can't have that. So wow, kudos to this initiative and all that belong in it and are doing. Just I will look into it because wow, very, very interesting. Thank you for telling us. Now just going more, now that we know a little bit more about you, tell us from your perspective. You can speak about India, but obviously also tell us a little bit more specifically about Bangalore, because I know for such a big country as India, we shouldn't generalize it as a country. Obviously, it is a country, but every area is quite different in general, and specifically how they are acting and reacting to the pandemic and what their situation is. So start telling me just what is the most important thing that is happening right now in Bangalore and in India from a topic news perspective. Like, what is it that you are talking about? What is it that everybody is focused on?
Mhm. Okay, so as you know, India went into lockdown because of the pandemic way early in March. That was a time when we had like literally three digits cases, but the entire country was locked down with the hope that this can arrest the spread. So we were under lockdown for about 2.5 months, and it's only in June that things have started slowly opening up. But unfortunately, the cases have risen so much. Now we are almost touching 1 million cases. Deaths have risen up. We are into five-figure deaths right now, unfortunately. So right now, people across the country are kind of questioning, okay, what did the lockdown do? So right now we are kind of reflecting on what happened in the 2.5 months that we were locked up at homes, and what did not happen. That's more important. Like, did we not prep our primary healthcare services? Did we not prep people in terms of how to be prepared? And did we even educate them as to how this whole thing really works? So while there were individual efforts to do so, but I think the message also is, when it comes to people's survival versus getting caught with an infection, I think people have really different choices to make, or rather difficult choices to make. So in India, what the pandemic also brought in was the biggest exodus since the partition in 1947, where a lot, when I say a lot, millions of migrants had to move from cities to their villages in different parts of India. So that's a very unfortunate humanitarian crisis we witnessed in the recent past. So that is something that the country is talking about right now. Well, many people have fortunately made home, and unfortunately lives have been lost in this whole movement. because the trains, the buses, and any kind of public transportation was shut. People literally walked
Wow.
hundreds and thousands of kilometers to their houses. Well, they didn't have a place to go. I mean, where else would you go if you're not going back to your house, when you are shunted out of your jobs, shunted out of the cities that you built in the first place? So that is something that the country is reflecting on right now, big time, because that's a scale of migration we've never seen before. We were not prepared to handle. And the lockdown was kind of draconian, if I may say so, because everything was shut down with a notice of like 2 hours. That's not something that you expect a country like as big as India to kind of go through. So again, has given us a lot of thinking in terms of what did we do wrong, because the cases were not arrested at the end of all these efforts. So the other thing that's making news in the past 2 days is the unwanted escalation of tensions in the borders between India and China. So that's also something that we are worrying, besides the pandemic, I would say, because for any country, this is not the time to go to war. Any time is not the time to go to war, but this is definitely not the time to go to war. So that is also something that we are speaking about. And in Bangalore, majorly, since we don't luckily live next to international borders, the major worry has been, what if the virus really comes to my doorstep? What do I do? How do I prevent it? Or rather, what choice do I have? The healthcare system has already started buckling in other cities. Bangalore, not so much. But when you read stories of denial of care, when you read stories of people actually dying on the corridors of hospitals, you get your spines really shivering, because it is them today, it could be anybody tomorrow. I mean, it could be us tomorrow. So that's actually having a lot of effect on how people are thinking through this, and hoping against hope that hopefully everything is going to be okay in the days to come. But I should mention that Bangalore is not as affected as other metros right now.
Okay, that's what I
The other
wanted to ask
metros,
you.
yeah. So the other metros compared to Bangalore, like the city of Delhi or Mumbai, which is a major hub, economic hub, or even Kolkata, which is a city towards the eastern side of the country. The cases, if you actually look at those cities, Bangalore hasn't been so bad so far, fortunately. But there is no guarantee that it wouldn't. So that's where we are hoping against hope that things are not going to go down go down that road.
Oh, hopefully, because like as we were talking earlier, anything can change at any time. So from good to bad or bad to good, and that's the scary and good thing, I guess, in this pandemic. So hopefully Bangalore stays in that. And just one more question, staying on topic. Information wise, news wise, how is India, aside from the fact that we were talking about of there's so much misinformation and disinformation, where you were telling me about the initiative, the scientist initiative, aside from that, how is the everyday person in India handling news? Do they do they watch news? Do they actively want to inform themselves, or are they trying to just ignore it? I'm asking this because I spoke in one of the first stories, I spoke with a journalist from Peru, and she was telling me that, as you may know, Peru is one of the hardest hit countries currently in the world. And she was telling me that one of the difficulties she has as a journalist is that, unfortunately, there are a lot of people that just don't want to know anything any longer, out of fear, sadness, and just enough. And so she has to try to find ways to inform, because of course you need to be informed. So just tell me a little bit about the India perspective on this.
Sure. So most of what I'm going to say is my personal account,
Yeah.
because as you know, we are all locked up. So I get, really limited interaction with people at the moment. So yes, I think that's a story that's true pretty much everywhere, because of the fatigue that's the the overload of news and information brought into the current scenario. In India, as I said, when we started with reporting cases early in March, there was obviously a curiosity for everybody to kind of look into, or at least when I would say everybody, I'm talking about people who can at least access news channels and um, newspapers and things like that. The numbers were something that were already always ticking on the screen. So you say, okay, on this day, these are the number of cases reported, these are the number of people who have recovered, and these are the number of people who have deceased because of the disease. So those were the numbers that were ticking in. People were interested to know. In fact, I can speak of my own family member who was like, okay, this is the ticking number, who actually kept track of, how the numbers were moving. So when I speak of this I'm talking about in the month of March, April. So when the things were just heating up in India, so to say, and I think there was a general curiosity for people to know how this would progress, because we had already seen the worst uh, days in China, in Iran, in Italy, where things were taking turn for the worse. So obviously people were curious to know, okay, what's happening, how is this, etc. But what is also the flip side of this curiosity is, because people were at home, the news channels also kind of took this an opportunity to make the news so sensational that if you had one case reported in the city, they made it sure that it was identifiable who that is, apart from the fact that they didn't name the person. And that unfortunately caused a lot of stigma. So people were like, okay, I know that there is a person in my locality who is possibly tested positive for this infection. Then I am more curious to know who that person is. Because the news that were thrown at us because of the sensationalism, it was more like, if you ever even come, just so close to that person, you are going to be doomed and die. Yeah.
So run.
And that is not what it is. That is not what it is. What you had to do, in fact, was to educate people against the stigma, against letting down people who were infected. I mean, they are the people who would need a lot of care. But if you're just shutting them out of the system, of the society, where do they have to go? And the same thing was observed even with health workers, because there were stories where if you were a doctor, you were kicked out of your rental apartment or a rental house because you were thought to be somebody who would be a carrier of the disease. But if you are a carrier of the disease and you know how to prevent it from spreading to others, then you're good, right? I mean, you're serving the society in your capacity.
Exactly.
So these are stories that I think came out of the sensationalization of this whole pandemic and demonization of the virus, so to say. And that actually was the initial days of reporting and all that. Well, I would say that kind of happened in the months of March and April. When it came towards May and the cases never got down, it was only increasing. They got to a point where people were fatigued, as you also mentioned in the case of Peru. People were fatigued, and unfortunately, this was the time people should have better informed themselves, because they should have known where the infection is spreading. How do I prevent myself? How do I not go into a marketplace? How do I not, go into a gathering of people, either to attend a religious ceremony or so to say, just go hang out.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that didn't happen. People just said, okay, I am not going to listen to it. So they thought ignorance was bliss. Ignorance can never be bliss in this case. So now, although the front pages of papers really dedicate themselves to covering how the pandemic is spreading in the country and the city, people don't want to read it. People don't want to buy newspapers because, one, there's a fear that the virus can be transmitted through newspapers, and second, they're fatigued. As you all, I think you also mentioned that this is taking a toll on everybody's mental well-being. Um, just seeing those numbers is definitely making a lot of people anxious. In fact, I have advised my parents and people of age group to not consume news at the moment, because that actually was creating a lot of anxiety, and they were on their wits end saying, okay, what if, and what if.
Yeah.
So
Obviously every person is different, but you have to know where your limit is. You know,
true.
if you can handle and if you want to handle that type of information on a daily basis, or if it's
True.
better to just distance at least for a little bit. But
True.
it is so interesting to hear you speak about the stigma towards people that have tested positive, and also just for news outlets identifying the first case or a case, and instead of communicating or educating in order for others to prevent, was more of like sensationalizing that story, who the person is, where that person potentially got infected, and what to, you know, because one of the things that really this pandemic, I think, just really highlights it over and over again, is that no matter where we are from or where we live, the distance, again, going back to Latin America, just we are far away, Latin America and India, and we are quite different from a cultural perspective, language, from everything and anything. But at this, in the ironically enough, sadly enough, we are the same. You speak of March and April of having people that were stigmatized, and even healthcare workers that are actually there helping. They know what they're doing. They're there helping each and every one of us. And then unfortunately, they get tested, they are positive, and instead of having support from the community that they've been helping, they are told, no, go away, we don't like you, etc. And the same thing happened in March and April in many different countries in Latin America, of doctors, nurses being kicked out of their apartment building, of their neighborhood, and where the day before food was brought to them so they wouldn't have to cook. You know, thanks were given to them as they walked by from their windows. From one day to another, they were hated and treated as the worst criminal, let's say. And it's so sad to see that even with an example happening across the world, it would still happen. We're different, but we are not.
We are the same species, I would say. Blame it on that, because yeah, this has pushed everybody to their limits in various cases. And really, I think it's kind of brought out the inner demons of some people, I would say. And of course, angels have also emerged, but
Yeah, of
then
course.
uh, when you really look at the human species as is, you know where we stand, unfortunately, because we really are incapable of gratitude, I would say, at some cases, and incapable of really recognizing what as a society we need. And that, you know, insensitivity is definitely going to come back to us, is what I would think.
Yeah, that it's ah, but okay, continuing with our talk, getting away a little bit, because you know I could talk forever about this with you. So, but just to keep it more on track with this interview, you already told me that when it happened in March, literally in moments, India went on lockdown. Could you tell me more about Bangalore? What was the first thing, the first step, the first measure that they took? And was it before the country went on lockdown or after? Just tell me a little bit specifically about Bangalore, I would think.
Okay. So, no, Bangalore did not go under lockdown before the country went. So, when the Prime Minister announced on the 23rd of March that the country is going into lockdown, that's our first, experience of lockdown, so to say. Prior to that, I would think that there were two small areas, so to say, small localities or neighborhoods, if you want to call, that had positive cases, like a couple of positive cases, and only that area was sealed. So saying that, okay, people from that area were not allowed to go elsewhere, but people who were from outside were not allowed to come inside. But they had some sustainable way of feeding those people, giving them food hampers and things like that. So it was okay. It affected really a minuscule of the population in terms of their mobility, but the city was normal in that sense, so everybody could go anywhere. But on the 23rd of March, when the national wide lockdown was announced, so the prime minister gave us a national address at 8 o'clock in the evening, and from 12 o'clock that night we were under lockdown. So we literally had 4 hours to prepare for something of the scale. A lot of mobilization, yeah, a lot of mobilization of police forces were, or rather had happened, because you had to start implementing and put people in their houses from the next day. A lot of panic buying, a lot of panic as such, because there were people who didn't know where to go. I'm talking about people who had houses, and imagine people who didn't have houses. Every economic activity was going to was going to be stopped, and you obviously lost jobs if you were a blue collar worker working in a construction site, or you're working as working in a restaurant, for example, because restaurants were closed as well. So these people will probably okay, in India there is this concept of slums, which is a lot of people live in really depleted houses where there is lack of basic infrastructure for sewage, infrastructure for drinking water, or even there isn't a proper house. So people really build it up with makeshift materials like sheets and some kind of metal structures and things like that. So a lot of people in cities do live in those areas, and they usually are employed with blue collar jobs, meaning hard manual labor. So when those jobs are shut because of lack of or closure of a lot of economic activities which demand these kind of labor, a lot of people are homeless, and we are in the middle of summer. Being homeless, where do you expect people to go? So that kind of issue did crop up in Bangalore as well. And the lockdown had those effects, saying that, okay, there were a lot of people didn't know where to go. Panic ensued because of that. And again, I can tell my own experience about that evening. I would never forget for a long time, I suppose. I'm listening to this address, I am panicking because, well, personally, I'm kind of being selfish here because I have a dog, and animals food was my first thing on my mind, because when a lot of things really shut down and their food is not as easily available as our food, I am like, okay, what do I do for him now? I mean, I don't know what is going to be available tomorrow and what's not. So I ran into panic. And then obviously panic buying ensued. We were a lot privileged to have the ability to afford whatever we wanted to stock up. But a lot of people don't. And that is going to impact many ways. Thankfully, there was no rioting, there was no looting of that sorts, but then people could have been pushed to it because there is no way to go, no way to afford food. So that was the experience with respect to Bangalore. But yeah, Bangalore did enter the lockdown along with the country.
So thank you for sharing also your story, because everybody reacts differently, right? You thought about, as you know, I'm based in Germany, and we didn't have a full lockdown. It was very it worked, obviously, compared with other countries. We're doing much better, but it wasn't a draconian quarantine lockdown or anything like that. But even though I was aware of the situation beforehand by looking at Italy and other countries and just my own obsession with the pandemic, I also thought the same as you did, not for a dog, but for my cat. I thought, okay, I better stock up like everything that I need, because what if they stop producing or they stop delivering, or what am I gonna do? So,
and how do you explain lockdowns to pets? I mean, they don't understand this.
Exactly. So Yeah, it's a small thing, obviously. It's a privileged thought to have, obviously, thinking of your pet, but it's anything and everything is affected, right? So, and staying on the topic of yourself that you were just telling me that it's a memory you'll never forget when Prime Minister was addressing the country and saying we're going on lockdown. Is this when you realized that the situation, that the pandemic was more serious than what was thought of and spoken about? Or did something happen, a moment earlier? I just want to know your experience, your story. When was it that you had a bit of a pause in whatever you were doing and thought, this is bad?
Okay, because as you said, we as people who are enthusiastic about science and journalism coming behind that, you keep track of what is happening elsewhere in the country. And of course, this infection did not start in India. So I was tracking a lot of, the progress in other countries. So US was already doing bad by that time. So when a country like US, which is reasonably densely populated, so to say, with cities like New York, it wasn't a surprise at all that things will go down the spiral in India. So lockdown or no lockdown, so to say, evaluating the kind of healthcare facilities we have here, I never for a moment believed what the government was saying that the lockdown is going to help us be coronavirus free. That was never going to happen. So that was the image that was projected. There was a lot of hope against hope, so to say, from the authorities, saying that, okay, if you cooperate with us for the lockdown, we are going to have a country where there isn't going to be no infection. But I didn't buy that. Some people did not. A lot of people did, unfortunately. So now we are here where we are, as of today, fifth largest country, fifth country with the highest number of infections, and unfortunate things happening as elsewhere in the world. So I never really thought that we would get any better from where we started. I also had this feeling that we will end up having a big outbreak and everybody is going to be at a loss of what to do, kind of a question mark on their faces, because honestly we never invested, even before the pandemic, on the healthcare infrastructure that we should have had. So that even during the lockdown there wasn't the expected level of either investment or upgradation of what we have. So there was no inkling for me to think that this is going to get it better. It never would get
Never.
better. Yeah, the kind of conversations I was having with my immediate family as well, saying that, okay, we have to brace ourselves, because this is never going to, get better than here. So we were all of the same understanding that we have a lot of things to expect in the coming days. We have a lot of things to kind of, change in our lifestyles, in our way we look at things, because this is going to stay. It's never going to be wished away.
No,
So yeah.
it cannot be wished away. Unfortunately, it's it's a nice wish to have. You do have children that wish it. You have grandparents. Coming to my experience, I have my grandmother in Sicily. That since the beginning, she just, I know it's something that you say and hope. She's very religious, and one of the things, every time we talk on the phone, she tells me, oh, I just hope, I wish, I pray that just like it came, that one day, just like it came one day, that this virus will disappear one day. And what do you say to that? I say I wish the same, right? But, okay, so yours was more progressive, because of looking at different countries and situations and your knowledge and your work and experience from science. It wasn't one moment that something was said or something happened that made you stop. Yeah, it's every story is different indeed. And just staying with obviously your experience, because this is your story along with Bangalore's and India's. What are your hopes? What are your concerns? What is it that you think that is going to happen to Bangalore and India in the next few days, in the next few weeks, that you want to happen or you don't want to happen? Just give me give me a look into your thoughts.
Okay. Basically, two things, in the sense of, there are some things that unfortunately I think will happen, and there are some things I wish would not happen. So here are things that I think will happen. If you look at what we have been doing in terms of testing, the number of cases that we are doing every day, although there has been an increase in since the initial days of procuring the test kits and a lot of investment in that kind of infrastructure to be able to test somebody to say whether that person is really positive or negative for this infection, we have a long way to go. The number of testing we have been doing is far, far less than what we should have been doing, because ours is a very densely populated country. It's very possible for somebody to have an infection picked up randomly when you're out on the street. So as long as we up and prep our testing compared to what we are doing it today, we will never be able to know who that person is. We will never be able to contact trace. And if we cannot contact trace, then we should acknowledge that this is going to go and blow out of proportion, which is unfortunately already happening in some clusters. But this is going to be a mega disaster if we can't do that. So looking at the lack of seriousness on that end, I would say we will be facing severe challenges in terms of our healthcare infrastructure catching up to this. We have already we are hearing stories where people are being denied hospital beds. We are hearing stories where private as well as public healthcare facilities in India, which private care here is a big part of healthcare. So they are shutting their doors to people who have any signs of um, COVID 19 infections. Pregnant women have been denied hospital beds and unfortunately have succumbed to this. There has been a case in Delhi, which is the capital city, where a pregnant woman, 8 months into her pregnancy, was shown doors in 8 hospitals, and eventually she could not make it. She could not live up to a day to see the baby. It really is so unfortunate and so disheartening. But realistically, these are the cases we will be increasingly hearing because of the way we are ramping ourselves to it. And the other thing is, of course, the lack of civility, so to say, among people, because there are still quote unquote COVIDiots who do not wear a mask, who do not maintain social, physical distancing. And this includes people in power. This includes our own ministers who attend public events without a mask, who attend public events and get themselves clicked with 100 of supporters around them. And this is some kind of a joke that's being played on the public, so to say, because you as a minister need to set an example. You need to show people how to live. If you are flouting all the rules that you yourself made, I'm talking about a health minister of a state going into a religious ceremony without a mask, not practicing social well, physical distancing, and then you what how do you show your face to people and ask them? True. Yeah. So that's very unfortunate. And considering all this, that also tells me that we are going to brace for difficult days. It's only tip of the iceberg that we are touching, and things are going to go downwards from here. So these are realistic hopes, or rather realistic expectations from my side for the country. Unfortunately, so cynical it may sound. But I am hopeful in the fact that we still have a lot of time to gear up ourselves. If we invested in the right things and did the right things, we still have time to buy ourselves some kind of immunity, so to say. I'm not talking about the medical immunity, but so to say immunity.
Cool. I think there is a little problem.
Washing hands.
Oh, sorry, you
Can you hear me?
you cut off a little bit. I didn't hear what you
Okay.
said. You were saying the immunity, so not
Yeah. So not the medical immunity, I mean. I'm talking about immunity against getting worse in terms of where we stand in the pandemic. So if you still practice the much advertised guidelines of wearing a mask, practicing physical distancing, not getting uh, not hanging out with friends just because you haven't met them for like 3 months, that isn't what you need right now. You need to be more responsible from the citizenry, as we say. And if we still did that, we may have a better chance to kind of ward off uh, all the cumulative effects of this pandemic. There could still be infections, but at least we buy time for ourselves. So that's my hope. I really wish people really take that up to them to really practice these things, not only for the sake of themselves, but also for the sake of the society at large.
And yeah, it's the hope of many of us that understand and see the severity of this pandemic, that we hope that, but we also know that it can change, and that's what we try to do in informing, right? And staying with this topic, the last topic of our interview, just with what can change or what can happen. Tell me one thing: if you could give a message to yourself in the future, so Spoorthy of in 14 days, what would you tell her? What's the message that you would give her?
I would say remain hopeful, trust that people will follow or at least listen to what science has to say, and not be foolish enough to buy anything and everything that has been thrown at them. I wish, or rather, I would tell that the Spoorthy from 14 years will
14
have more. Sorry, 14 days will have more to really appreciate of what our public is capable of in terms of absorbing fact-based news. I would also wish to see our cases, if not going down, but not exponentially raising, flattening the curve. But 14 days is too early. My inner self tells me that, but then I'm hoping against hope. At least we get to a point where we are able to nicely see a curve that's flattening, and we are also having our health care kind of really set up to really take it up when it really comes to treating people who need care. So that's a big wish list, I would say, but that's what I would want to hear in like 14 days, nothing more. But realistically, again, it's really telling me hard that from where we start today, 14 days, it's going to be worse. The numbers are going to only increase. But yeah, I'm hoping against hope. Let's see.
Hoping against hope. Well, the topic is a very difficult and interesting topic, but I must say, Spoorthy, it has been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for your time, and now, as you know, we will see you in 14 days, and we will continue our interview then. So thank you very much, and see you in 14 days.
Thank you so much, Dara. It was nice speaking to you and sharing the story, because that's what most of us would want to do, right? Because we're looking at some channel to really share experiences, and this has been one. And I'm really grateful that you had given me this opportunity. And yeah, see you back in 14 days with hoping against hope.
Exactly. Thank you very much. And
Thank you for having me.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.